This is Teresa with My Crochet Obsession, and today I want to show you how I crochet the flower stitch. It's also called the daisy stitch. It's a beautiful stitch with a lot of applications in blankets, cardigans, scarves, hats, purses. But my favorite application of this stitch is to use it as a border on a blanket or a shawl. Now, the characteristic that makes this stitch a little bit unique to crochet is that you crochet the petals of the flowers on the crochet fabric as you go. You'll be using 2 double crochets as the ring that you attach the petals to. The flowers can be made 5 petal or 6 petal. The stitch that you choose will determine the size of your flowers. Today I'm going to demonstrate the petals made with double crochet. The stitch sample on the bottom that I'm showing you here uses 2 double crochets to form the petals, forming a 2-inch flower. And the sample on the top that we will be doing together today uses 1 double crochet in the petal. As you can see, that determines the different size of the flower. For today's stitch tutorial, I will be using Caron Simply Soft in the color gold and the recommended 5mm crochet hook. For today's stitch sample, begin with a slip knot on your hook. Chain multiples of 8. I'm going to chain a foundation chain of 32. My chain of 32 is complete. And then chain 1 and single crochet into the second chain from the hook. I like to go into the back bump or the hip of the chain. And then single crochet in every chain for the remainder of this row. The second row of single crochet stitches is complete. Bearing in mind that the petals of our 5-petal flower, once they are in, that they hang down longer than the double crochet row that they are being put in. So I like to put in additional rows before I begin my flower stitches. For that reason, add an additional row of double crochet before we turn and begin our daisy stitches. So chain 2, yarn over and turn your work. Skip the first stitch because that stitch is the chain up of stitch number 1, yarn over and double crochet into the second stitch. And your pattern repeat for this row is double crochet into each stitch from the previous row. You should have a total of 32 stitches. The third row is complete, and now the fun begins. The following row will be our daisy stitches. I've decided to place my stitches every 8 stitches in this first row. We'll have a total of 3 daisies when we complete this row. I am keeping my daisies with some distance between them because on the following rows of daisies, I will be placing a daisy in between the daisies from this first row of flower stitches. Let's begin. Chain 2, which counts as a double crochet, yarn over and turn your work, and into the second stitch, place a double crochet. We'll double crochet, this counts as stitch number 2, and we will double crochet 8 stitches before we begin to place our petals for our first daisy flower. And that is stitch number 8. Now, to build our first flower, we will be using stitch number 8 and stitch number 7 as our ring to build our flower petals. This will be a 5-petal flower. You can follow this same process and make a 6-petal flower, but understand that your ring, the center of it, will become much larger. But there again, that is a look. All right, for the 5-petal flower stitch, chain 2, which counts as your first double crochet, and I'm going to double crochet only 1 this time. I'll show you the variation, and then chain 2 and slip stitch into that 8th stitch. Around it, you're slip stitching around that 8th stitch. Now chain 2 again, double crochet 1 around that 8th stitch again, chain 2 and slip stitch around that double crochet, stitch number 8. Now I fold my work and expose that bar between the 2 stitches from the previous row and slip stitch. Chain 2 and double crochet 1 into that same stitch again where you slip stitched. Double crochet, chain 2 and slip stitch back into that same stitch again. Now turn the work, and we're going to now be working around stitch number 7. So I'm going to slip stitch into underneath stitch number 7 and chain 2, single crochet. This is my 4th petal. Chain 2 and single crochet. Excuse me, not single, slip stitch. Now petal number 5, chain 2 and single crochet, chain 2 and slip stitch, and you have a little 5-petal flower. Now I chain 1 and then I double crochet. That chain is only to bring me where I am in line for my next stitch. That's the only purpose that it serves. So double crochet, and I'm going to double crochet 8 again, and that is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, let's look at what we've got and compare to my original sample that I showed you. He's smaller by a considerable amount, but he's also, notice that the center circle is smaller. These are approximately a little less than 2 inches. These are 1.5. Okay. They also, this petal is not hanging all the way down to my foundation chain, whereas this petal is right to the foundation chain, which is a look, like I said. And you could make this flower even larger by putting 3 double crochet. Again, once you start adding stitches around your stitches that are counting as your ring, this center gets more and more open. There's nothing wrong with that. I just wanted to point that out as you're deciding how large you want your flower. But let's continue with this smaller flower stitch. We've already chained 8 stitches away. Let's go on with our same little daisy. Chain 2. This little daisy is a really good size for learning this crochet fabric. And double crochet 1, chain 2, slip stitch around stitch number 16, chain 2, double crochet 1 around that same stitch again, and chain 2, slip stitch around stitch 16, and then turn the work, slip stitch into the top of that stitch from the previous row. He's not wanting to cooperate. Slip stitch, chain 2, double crochet into that stitch, 1 double crochet into the same stitch, chain 2, slip stitch into around that. Now turn the work and go to stitch number 15. Go under the post with a slip stitch, chain 2, double crochet 1, chain 2, slip stitch, chain 2, double crochet, and chain 2. That completes our second daisy, and our stitch pattern is to chain 1 here to complete the flower, and double crochet into the very first. Sometimes that stitch I will miss it, and then it affects my stitch count for my next row. So make sure you're getting the very next stitch from that daisy. And now that's stitch number 1. I'm going to come over 7 more stitches, and that'll be stitch number 24. In larger projects like the border of a shawl or a blanket, I oftentimes go in, count my stitches in advance, and place a stitch marker where I want to be sure and have a daisy stitch. If this will help you in this project, you may want to take a moment and mark the places where you will have your flower stitches. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Begin the daisy stitch here. Chain 2, double crochet, chain 2, slip stitch, chain 2, double crochet into the same stitch, chain 2, and slip stitch to join that petal. 2 petals are complete. Slip stitch into that next space where you're putting your petal. It'll be okay. Chain 2, double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, and now slip stitch around the previous stitch, number 23, chain 2, double crochet around stitch 23, chain 2, and slip stitch. Chain 2, double crochet, chain 2, and slip stitch. Chain 1, turn, get behind that petal, and double crochet into the next available stitch. Make sure to not skip any stitches from the previous row. Okay. And now double crochet into each stitch to complete the row. Two, 4, 6, 7. My 8th stitch goes into the top of the chain from the previous row. Top of the chain, and don't skip that. Your count will be off. And double crochet. Now let's look at our work and straighten out our little daisies. This is adorable. If you were going to make a little bracelet, you would chain up the circumference of your wrist and then half that in 2, and maybe just put 1 little daisy, maybe 2, to be on the top of your wrist. Because the flower stitch is not a reversible stitch, it is necessary to put in at least one, what I call a setup row, which will set you up to have your next flower stitches on the correct side of the work. I am going to come in with 2 rows of single crochet and a row of double crochet before I add my next flower stitches. I'm going to put those stitches also on each side. I'm going to alternate where the flowers appear in each row. That'll be easier to understand once we get to it. Enough talk. Let's crochet. As we begin to stitch this setup row, be sure and count your stitches. I'll troubleshoot where I think it's necessary. Chain 1, turn your work, and single crochet into the 2nd stitch from the previous row. And so that's stitch number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and stitch number 8. Okay, now we sort of lose a stitch here because he gets choked up, but we put in that extra chain behind our daisy So put a single crochet there. That's stitch number 9. And around that choke stitch is stitch number 10. And then back into the top of the next double crochet, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, now our petal stitch, 17, and around that choke stitch is 18, and into the next double crochet, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and around that chain is 25 and 26 around the choked stitch, and 27, 28, 29, 30, oops, oh yeah, that's right, 31, and stitch 32 is in the top of the chain. Okay, so the important thing to remember in this row is you lose these 2 posts that serve as your ring. They disappear. So we put one, and we have to put one around that chain stitch that we made, and then one around the choked stitch, as I call it, that you can see from the previous row. All right.
Let me pause a moment and just address the elephant in the skies. Obviously, I live near some type of airplane. Yes, it is Randolph Air Force Base in Universal City, Texas. And I am proud that we have an Air Force Base near San Antonio, where we train the Air Force pilots for the entire United States, I believe. But I could be mistaken about that. But nonetheless, because I like to keep my tutorials as authentic as possible, the narration as I'm stitching the stitches, I don't like to silence and voice over my tutorials. But if the background noise is a nuisance to you, let me know in the comments and I will fix that in the future. We have 2 more setup rows before we begin our daisy stitches.
Now, it seems logical that we would chain up here and put in our next row of daisies, but if we do, even if we alternate, they overlap onto one another. And I want them to not be that crowded. Now, that crowded look could be something that you want for whatever design you're doing. I can imagine that in a freeform piece, I might want one crowded up as like they grow in nature. But I'm not going to do that here. Chain 1 that counts as a single crochet, and come back one more time with single crochet, beginning in the 2nd stitch
and in the top of each stitch for this entire row. Be mindful of your stitch count. You should have a total of 32 stitches at the end of this row. My 2nd row of single crochet in my setup rows is complete. Now for one additional row of double crochet in order to then begin the flower stitches on the following row. In my setup stitches,
I'm creating the same pattern that I started with. The chain row counts as some single crochets. Then I came in with a single crochet. Then I put a row of double crochet before I started my daisies. But I need to get back down here anyway to begin my next row of daisies. So I'm going to come in repeating this pattern
I'm going to chain 2, yarn over, and double crochet into the second stitch, and that's stitch number 2. And that will be the stitch pattern for this row. Double crochet in each stitch from the previous row for a total of 32 stitches. Our final setup row of double crochet for the entire row is complete. Now let's look at our work. And we have a design choice here. We can continue to keep our daisies in a row, or we can alternate them. I'm going to, I think, alternate today, but I want to measure to make sure it's not going to hang off on the edge. So it's about a 1.5. So that's going to make 3/4 of an inch coming over. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's what we're going to do. We're going to alternate and have come in on stitch number 4 and have a daisy, and continue alternating our flower stitches all the way across this row. Let's begin. So chain 2, which counts as your double crochet, yarn over and turn the work into stitch. The next stitch is stitch number 2. Three and 4. Okay, the first daisy will be here in stitch number 4. Chain 2, double crochet into that post. We'll be forming the daisies exactly the way we did on the previous row. Chain 2 and single slip stitch. Chain 2, double crochet into that post. Chain 2 and slip stitch. Turn the work into the stitch from the previous row. Come under those 2 bars and slip stitch. Chain 2, double crochet 1, chain 2, slip stitch back into that same stitch, turn the work, and around stitch number 3, slip stitch, chain 2, double crochet around that post again, chain 2, and slip stitch, chain 2, double crochet around that stitch, chain 2, and slip stitch, chain 1, and double crochet into the next stitch. Be sure and find that next stitch right here. Okay, now we're going to stitch 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And here we will form another flower. Begin the flower stitch sequence, forming the petals around the last 2 double crochet that were made in this row. Okay, my flower has gotten discombobulated. Or it could be the crocheter has gotten mixed up. Probably that. First time I've done that. All right. Now, we need, there we go. Double crochet. Fold that petal over and then double crochet into, there we go. When you know you've got your daisy right, it flops over there when you go to that next stitch. And like I said, that's not the first time I've had that happen. All right, we're counting 8 this time to start our next daisy. So this is 2. 3. 7 and 8. Let's look at the work. See, our alternating pattern is looking adorbs. Continue this stitch pattern for the remainder of this row. Flower stitch in the last 2 stitches that we made, and then double crochet 8 for the final flower stitch, and then double crochet until the end of the row. I'll join back up with you at the end of this row, and we can begin once again to do our 3 setup rows before crocheting our 3rd and final flower stitch row. Our daisy stitch row is complete, and I love it. Now we will go through the process once again of what I call my setup stitches. Our first 2 rows consists of single crochet followed by 1 row of double crochet, and then we'll proceed with our flower stitches, and they will be in alignment with the flowers in the first flower row that we created. Look, I put 6 petals in this one. Okay, well, let's go back. So that's how you put in a 6-petal flower. And whenever you do it, I hope you plan to do it, but I didn't plan to do that, so I'm going to take one of my petals out. Yeah. Okay. But anyway, I'm glad that happened. I'm not going to edit it out because, you know, hey, you need to know how to do that. All right. I've slip stitched there, and now I'm going to chain 1 and go back behind. That's so funny. All right. It's the little things that make me laugh in life. And double crochet. That's 2 and 3 and don't forget the top of the chain for your last stitch there. Now let's look at the work. I'm going to go ahead and chain 1 because my next row is going to be single crochet, and I'm going to turn my work and skip the first stitch and into the next stitch, single crochet all the way back, and count the stitches. Make sure that you have 32. Okay, and don't forget, add the daisy. We need to crochet around that chain space. That's going to be my stitch number 5. And then also around the little choke stitch here, another single crochet. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, 9. This is your setup row. So if you get this row the correct count, then the next 2 rows are fine. And around your chain stitch, single crochet, and around the choked stitch, single crochet. And that accommodates for the 2 posts that you used for the flower. I lost my count. Let me go back here. Let's count those stitches. $15, $16, The next row is also a row of single crochet, so chain 1, turn the work, And into stitch 2, begin the single crochet. And this is your stitch pattern for this row. Single crochet in each stitch from the previous row for a total of 32 stitches. Our second row of single crochet is complete. Now a row of double crochet, and then our setup stitches will be completed and we will begin our final row of flower stitches. Let's begin with a chain up of 2. Yarn over, turn your work, and double crochet into the second stitch, and double crochet into every stitch from the previous for the remainder of this row. I'll rejoin you at the end of this row. Our 3 setup rows are complete. Now let's crochet our third and final row of flower stitches. Chain 2, counts as a double crochet, yarn over and turn your work. Skip the first stitch into the second stitch, double crochet, and double crochet until for 8 total stitches in this row. There's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. You can see that I'm going to line up with the daisies on the first row of daisies. So I'm going to line up right here. Continue your daisy stitch pattern. Continue the flower stitch pattern until the end of the row. And this is how I crochet the flower stitch. I've tried to point out today that the flower petals can be different sizes and be done in different stitches. The lower stitch sample has a flower of approximately 2 inches, and the stitch sample that we did together today, the flowers are about 1 inch. We're nearing the end of our time together today to stitch. I thoroughly enjoyed bringing this stitch sample to you. I love to crochet the flower stitch on just about everything. Let me know how you like this video by giving me a thumbs up. It really helps me to grow my channel. And I want to bring you content that you enjoy. By subscribing and activating that notification bell, you'll get notified every time I put up a new tutorial.